I remember the day the lawyer called, his voice tight and matter-of-fact, telling me my grandfather had left behind something significant for me, something he believed I would use wisely, something that was meant to give me a foundation after years of struggle. I was 23, juggling 2 part-time jobs, crashing on a friend's couch, eating cheap noodles most nights, and using duct tape to keep the sole of my only pair of work shoes together. That call felt like oxygen in the middle of drowning. I cried quietly in the bathroom at work, one hand on the stall wall, the other clutched over my mouth, not from greed, but from the sheer weight of someone finally believing in me enough to leave something behind. But that joy never had a chance to bloom. The next time I saw my parents and older brother, they were all strangely warm. My father brought me coffee, which he hadn't done since I was 12. My mother smiled too wide and kept touching my hair, calling me baby like she hadn't hurled that word as an insult for years. My brother, always distant and dismissive, was suddenly full of brotherly advice, telling me how we should invest together and think long-term. I knew then something was off, but I had no idea how quickly and precisely they would destroy me. The will had a clause that none of us had expected. Though the money was intended for me, it was to be managed in trust by my closest blood relatives until I reached 25. My grandfather had trusted them. That trust became my undoing. They filed for control immediately, talked their way into access, and within 6 months, it was all gone. They sold off the old farmhouse I had dreamed of fixing up, liquidated investments I'd never even seen, and told me it was for the best. When I protested, my brother shouted that I didn't understand how money worked. My mother told me she couldn't believe how selfish I was being, and my father simply shook his head and muttered, just like always, never grateful. I ended up in a shelter the following winter, wearing a coat with a broken zipper, and praying no one from my old high school would recognize me. I worked night shifts in a diner and took online courses during the day, swallowing bitterness and the betrayal like rusted nails. No one checked in. No one helped. My mother blocked me when I asked for just a small loan for a deposit on a room. My brother posted pictures on social media from Bali with captions like, "Grind never stops," while wearing a Rolex he'd bought with money that was meant to keep me safe. It took me 5 years. 5 years of clawing my way back to something, like stability. I started a small design firm from a corner in a shared apartment, built it out of sheer sleepless nights and grit. When the first big client signed, I sobbed so hard, I nearly threw up. I met Elijah, my now husband, during one of those long nights at a print shop. He was there fixing a machine and made me laugh when the power cut. He saw me, not as broken or poor or inconvenient, just me. When we got engaged, I kept the circle small. I didn't send an invitation to my family. They found out anyway, through an article in a local magazine featuring our firm and mentioning the upcoming wedding. Suddenly, they were back. Suddenly, I was darling girl again. I opened my inbox one morning to messages from my mother with subject lines like, "Can we talk?" and "So happy for you." She sent a photo of her trying on dresses. My brother texted asking if he could give a speech. He wanted to share how proud he was of my journey. My father emailed Elijah directly, calling himself the father of the bride. The rage that burned in my stomach was so sharp it felt like metal. I hadn't heard from them in 4 years. 4 years of silence when I was sleeping in my car. 4 years of empty birthdays and holidays spent watching other families smile from behind windows I cleaned for cash. And now they wanted to walk me down the aisle like nothing had happened. I never responded. Not once. Not even to say no. The venue was an old greenhouse-turned-reception hall tucked behind a garden estate, wrapped in ivy and quiet glass, the kind of place I used to imagine when I was small and hiding under tables during my parents' fights. I chose it not for the glamour, but because it felt like me, rebuilt, repurposed, soft and blooming in a way that once seemed impossible. Elijah said we should keep it small, no drama, no second guessing. Everyone there mattered. Everyone there had earned their place in our story. The morning of the wedding was clear and golden. I remember the warmth of the sun slipping through the glass and the way the flowers smelled, wild and sweet. My dress wasn't designer, but it was perfect. Ivory with hand-sewn petals and sleeves that reminded me of my grandmother's curtains. Soft, lace and pale blue thread hidden in the hem for luck. My best friend buttoned me up with tears in her eyes, saying I'd never looked more like myself. I didn't see them arrive. Elijah did. He was inside checking the seating chart when he noticed 3 names that weren't on it. His face turned white when he saw them standing near the entrance, pretending to mingle like they belonged. My mother wore pale mauve, her lips pulled tight in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father had on a blazer that still had the department store tag tucked near the cuff. My brother was holding champagne he hadn't paid for, chatting up one of Elijah's aunts as if he hadn't once told me I was too dumb to succeed at anything. My maid of honor came rushing in with panic in her voice. "They're here," she whispered, breathless. "All 3 of them. Just smiling, like they weren't the reason you almost didn't survive last year." I felt something in me splinter. Not snap, not rage, just break wide open like an old scar that had never really healed. I stood there, holding the edges of the mirror with my hands trembling. My reflection stared back like it was daring me to shrink. I didn't. I walked out calmly, out the back door, through the garden path to the main entrance where they stood. My heels sank slightly in the soil, but I didn't stop. I approached them slowly, my dress trailing behind me like something sacred, like armor made of every night I had cried alone. My mother saw me first. "There she is!" she beamed, stepping forward like we were about to hug. "Oh, my sweet. Girl, you look like a dream." I didn't speak. Not at first. I looked each of them in the eyes. My father's evasive, already flicking around as if bored. My mother's glassy and expectant. My brother's cocky like he thought this was all just some dramatic show I'd throw. Then forgive like I always used to. "You're not on the guest list," I said quietly. Every word cut clean like a knife. On crystal. My mother blinked. "Darling, it's your wedding." "You weren't invited." "But we're family." "No," I said. "You were a lesson." There was a silence so deep even the birds stopped. My father's mouth opened, then closed again. My brother scoffed under his breath. "This is petty," he muttered, already starting to turn away. "Petty is stealing from someone and showing up years later for free wine," I snapped. "You lost the right to be near me the day you chose your greed over my survival." Elijah came then, gently, his hand on the small of my back, steadying me. My mother tried again. "Can't we talk?" she asked. "We miss you." I looked at her. This woman who had called me ungrateful when I begged for help, who had ignored voicemails where I was sobbing from hunger and exhaustion, who had gone radio silent the day I emailed proof of what they'd done with the money. You. "Miss the version of me who still needed you," I said. "She doesn't live here anymore." I turned, walked back down the path, back to the light and music and the people who had stayed. My hands were shaking when Elijah held them at the altar, but not from fear, from release, from finally choosing me. They watched the ceremony from the gate, I was told later. My mother cried when the vows were read. My brother paced. My father left halfway through, but I didn't look back once. The ceremony was like walking through a dream I'd stitched together thread by fragile thread. Every face I passed on the way to the altar was someone who had stood beside me when I had nothing. My college roommate, who used to split meals with me when we had only $10 for the week. My former manager, who once let me sleep in the back of the cafe when I had nowhere else to go. My best friend, who had read every job application I wrote at 3 a.m. and told me my future was still waiting, even when it felt like it had slammed its door in my face. And then there was Elijah. He didn't just fall in love with the person I am. Now, he loved the jagged, half-broken version of me too, the one who used to wake up gasping from nightmares about being left behind. He held me through panic attacks, through nights where I flinched at kindness because it felt so unfamiliar. He once told me that pain had made me strong, but love would make me whole. Our vows weren't rehearsed. We spoke from the marrow of our lives. I told him he was the first place I had ever felt safe, that loving him was like learning to breathe after years underwater. He told me he'd never met anyone who had walked through fire and still looked at the world with open hands. He promised to never let go. When we kissed, people cheered. I heard someone sob. The greenhouse was full of light, the kind that catches on the edges of things and makes everything shimmer. Later at the reception, I laughed in ways I hadn't in years. The kind of laugh that shakes your ribs loose and reminds you you're still alive. Elijah spun me on the dance floor until I couldn't tell if it was the lights or the joy making everything blur. Our cake had crooked layers but tasted like clouds. The playlist was a mix of old soul and ridiculous pop, and at one point everyone was singing "I Wanna Dance with Somebody," off-key, barefoot, sweaty, and unfiltered. That's when I saw her, my mother. She was standing outside the glass wall of the greenhouse behind the vines. I only noticed because I caught her reflection in a mirror across the room. She wasn't crying anymore. She wasn't angry. She just looked lost, like a child locked outside a house she used to live in. My brother was nowhere to be seen. My father was probably already back in his car pretending he'd never come. But she stood there, watching me laugh, watching Elijah lift me up in the air while our friends clapped and chanted my name like I'd just won a war. And maybe I had. There was a moment, a single suspended breath, where she looked like she might wave, might press her palm to the glass, might try one last time. But she didn't. She turned and walked away slowly, her heels sticking in the soft earth. I watched her disappear into the dark, and I let her go like an old ghost finally fading at dawn. That night, in the tiny cottage where Elijah and I stayed, I sat in the claw-foot tub with a glass of wine and tears I didn't understand. Not sadness, not grief, just the overwhelming pressure release of 1,000 days of surviving, finally giving way to peace. "I'm proud of you," Elijah whispered, kneeling beside the tub, brushing damp curls from my face. "You didn't just survive them, you outgrew them, and I realized for the first time ever that their absence didn't hollow me. It freed me. I didn't owe them my wedding. I didn't owe them a seat at the table I built from my own ruins. But I owed myself the life they tried to convince me I'd never be worthy of." The morning after the wedding, the world felt still in a way that used to frighten me. I woke before the birds, before the sun crept past the windowsill, and lay there next to Elijah, listening to the soft rhythm of his breath, wondering how I had made it to this place, this silence that didn't carry threat but peace. For most of my life, mornings had been heavy. The moment between sleep and waking was when my mind used to race with dread, of overdraft notices, of job rejections, of family voicemails laced in venom and guilt. But now, the silence held only one thing: calm. I wasn't waiting for the sky to fall. I wasn't running anymore. There were messages on my phone. The first was from my mother. She had texted me sometime after midnight. "I'm sorry. We didn't know how much we hurt you. We just thought maybe this wedding could fix things." The second came from my brother. "It was a beautiful ceremony. No hard feelings. Maybe we can talk now?" The third, hours later, was from my father. Just one sentence: "I hope you'll forgive us someday." Each message sat on the screen like a small stone, and I stared at them, not with the ache of a daughter wanting her family back, but with the detachment of someone who had finally learned how to bury the dead properly. Forgiveness is not a door they get to walk through just because I've healed. It's not an invitation to return to a life they shattered. Forgiveness, for me, looked like not replying. It looked like deleting the messages without ceremony. It looked like getting up, wrapping myself in a white robe, and stepping outside to let the sun kiss my face while Elijah made coffee inside. Later that week, I sat with my lawyer to finalize the last steps of something I'd quietly started 6 months before. A foundation in my grandfather's name. A grant fund for young adults who'd been cut off, abandoned, or robbed of their start. It wouldn't erase what had happened to me, but it would make sure my story wasn't just a wound, it would be a door. One of the board members asked if I wanted to include a note on the website, a personal message. I thought for a long time. And then I wrote, "To anyone told they'd never make it without the people who broke them, your survival is already proof they were wrong. Keep building, keep blooming. They'll knock one day. You don't have to answer." A year passed. Then another. I didn't hear from them again for a while, until the next message came. It was from a cousin I barely knew, forwarding a link. My brother had been arrested in a real estate scam. My parents had filed for bankruptcy. The empire they'd built on lies and stolen things was collapsing, and still, I felt nothing but distance. Not satisfaction, not cruelty, just the quiet knowing that karma isn't revenge. It's the mirror no one can escape. When Elijah and I bought our first home, he let me choose the door color. I picked deep green, the color of renewal, of things regrown. We planted a magnolia tree in the yard. It had taken root quickly, its branches reaching up like it remembered every storm and still chose to bloom. And every spring when it flowers, I sit on the porch and smile. Not because I won, but because they lost the chance to know the person I became, and I will never open that door again.